Day 7, Exodus 8:1-32. Exodus 8:1-32. And the Lord spoke to Moses, Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your territory with frogs. So the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, into your bedroom, on your bed, into the houses of your servants, on your people, into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls. And the frogs shall come up on you, on your people, and on all your servants. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, Entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may sacrifice to the Lord. And Moses said to Pharaoh, Accept the honor of saying when I shall intercede for you, for your servants, and for your people, to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river only. So he said, Tomorrow. And he said, Let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. And the frogs shall depart from you, from your houses, from your servants, and from your people. They shall remain in the river only. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried out to the Lord concerning the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. So the Lord did according to the word of Moses. And the frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, and out of the fields. They gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them, as the Lord had said. So the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land, so that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice on man and beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said. And the Lord said to Moses, Rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh as he comes out to the water. Then say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants, on your people and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. And in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land. I will make a difference between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall be. And the Lord did so. Thick swarms of flies came into the house of Pharaoh, into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted because of the swarms of flies. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, Go, sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses said, It is not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then will they not stone us? We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he will command us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far away. Intercede for me. Then Moses said, Indeed I am going out from you, and I will entreat the Lord, that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. But let Pharaoh not deal deceitfully any more, and not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord, and the Lord did. According to the word of Moses, he removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also, neither would he let the people go. UCG Bible Commentary contains 2 sections. 1. Exodus 6:28-8 Commentary. Note: following book-ended section of recording is a rereading of the commentary read also on the prior day. Aaron's rod, 10 plagues on Egypt begin. The miracles begin. Moses was now in his 80th year. He was beginning the final 40 years of his life in leading the nation of Israel to the Promised Land. Moses and Aaron had been prepared by God to understand that Pharaoh would be very stubborn, regardless of the miracles that were to be performed. Pharaoh also had some tricks that could be performed through his magicians, perhaps even with demonic help. Pharaoh's magicians somehow imitated the first 3 miracles that Moses displayed, those with the snakes and the first 2 plagues, the water to blood and the frogs, After that, the magicians could no longer duplicate or simulate miraculous plagues. The ability to work magic with snakes was a skill in which the Egyptian magicians apparently prided themselves. The power to control and direct the movements of such venomous reptiles was one of the things of which the Egyptian was most proud, and in which he was most skillful. Already in the time when the pyramids were being built, E.A. Wallace Budge, Egyptian Magic, 1971, p. 5. This could have been akin to snake charming, a fleshly skill, or something supernatural, originating from Satan, the chief serpent. The New Testament tells us the names of the chief magicians were Jannes and Jambres, 2 Timothy 3:8. Their magic, though powerful, was not equal to the power by which God worked through Moses. Nevertheless, even after the power of God prevailed, Pharaoh did not listen. In the future, the Bible reveals an awesome geopolitical power known as the Beast will arise on the world scene. Its leader will be a dictator like Pharaoh, and as Pharaoh was with the priests of Egypt, he will be in league with a false religious power that will perform many wonders and miracles. Will we be able to discern the power of God as opposed to the power of this false system? There are those who will be deceived. Revelation 13:13-14. Through his written word, God promises that if we stay close to him, we will not be deceived. Returning now to Exodus, let us examine the first 3 plagues on Egypt, plagues that even the Israelites experienced. 1. Waters made blood. Each of the plagues of Egypt was an assault on multiple Egyptian gods. For instance, the plague on the waters was a slap at Khnum, the giver of the Nile, at Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, at Sodpet, the god of Nile floodwaters, at Osiris, whose bloodstream was the Nile, at Edjo, the goddess of the delta, at Hatmahit, guardian goddess of fish and fishermen, and at various other deities that should have been looking out for the Egyptians. Whether the waters were turned into actual blood is unclear. It is possible that the waters simply appeared this way. The Nelson Study Bible points out, the Hebrew word translated blood can refer to a red color as in Joel. It might be that God caused torrential rains to flood and pollute the sources of the Nile to create this plague. Red soil and algae would make the waters of the Nile red, unfit for drinking and deficient in oxygen for the fish. 1997. Indeed, volcanic or meteoric activity could cause a similar pollution of blood-red coloring, as appears to be the case in a prophesied future event in Revelation 8:8. And the Bible does seem to indicate that there was geologic upheaval at the time of the Exodus. Compare Psalm 114, 1-6. In any case, no matter what the actual change in Egypt's waters was, and no matter how God brought it about, the important thing to realize is that he brought it about. It was clearly a divine miracle. 2. Frogs. One of the gods worshipped by the Egyptians was Heket, whose image was a frog, or a woman with the head of a frog. Heket was the goddess of birth, midwives, and safe deliveries, frogs in moderate numbers being seen as signs of life, renewal, and happiness. After the overabundance of them, and then the stench of huge piles of dead frogs, it would seem that the goddess Heket would have lost credibility. Furthermore, the court of Hapi, mentioned above, included crocodile gods and frog goddesses, and the primordial gods Nun, Kek, and He were each depicted as a man with a frog's head. This plague, though imitated by the magicians, causes Pharaoh to yield, but his stubbornness then prevails and he changes his mind. 3. Lice. Though the Egyptians revered no specific god of lice, so far as we know they did worship an insect god, Keeper, who is represented as a scarab beetle. Furthermore, we should see how this plague was a slap at the Egyptian gods in general, who were unable to protect their subjects from the infestation. Indeed, Harpa-Kerd Horus in child form was invoked to ward off dangerous creatures, while Imhotep was besought as a god of medicinal healing. But beseech as they might, there was no relief. Even Pharaoh himself was considered a god, the divine incarnation of the sky and sun god Horus, yet he personally suffered from this plague. The lice infestation could not be imitated by the magicians. They therefore yield, but Pharaoh does not. End prior day rereading. 2. Exodus 8:20-10 Commentary. Still more plagues. Flies to locusts. Before sending the 4th plague, God says that he will prevent it and the remainder of the plagues from afflicting the Israelites in Goshen. Thus the first 3 plagues had been experienced by everyone, including the Israelites, but the 7 last plagues out of 10 afflict the Egyptians only. That the 7 last plagues are distinct is quite interesting in light of the fact that we actually find this phrase in Revelation 15:1, in reference to the final plagues poured out on rebellious mankind, following a period of suffering that will come on God's people, physical and spiritual, and on the rest of the world. And, just as in Egypt, God's people of the end time will be spared the 7 last plagues. 4. Flies. Concerning the word flies, the Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary states that these were not flies, such as we are accustomed to, or perhaps not only such flies as Egypt had and still has those too, but diverse sorts of flies, i.e. flying buzzing insects. PS 7845. The gad fly, the cockroach, the Egyptian beetle, for all these are mentioned by different writers. The worship of flies, particularly of the beetle, in the form of the scarab god Keper, was a prominent part of the religion of the ancient Egyptians. 1961 note on Exodus 8:20-31. Furthermore, as the flies crawled all over them, flew into their eyes, covered their food, and buzzed incessantly around them, adding to their misery, where was the supreme Amun, helper of the pious and god of the wind, to blow away this plague? Where was the guardian goddess Mafdet and the protector god Sed? Finally, the divine Pharaoh begins to bargain, agreeing to let the Israelites sacrifice to God in Goshen. But Moses points out that this would be an abomination to the Egyptians, since they considered it detestable to sacrifice sheep. See Genesis 3:32, Genesis 46:34, and that now really hating the Israelites they might stone them. So with flies still buzzing around him, Pharaoh agrees to let the Israelites travel a short way into the wilderness to sacrifice. But once again, the stubborn ruler changes his mind. 5. Death of livestock. As in most pagan societies, oxen had strong attachments to various deities in Egypt. Apios, the bull god, was the living personification of the creation god Ptah. The creator sun gods Atum and Re, later syncretized into a single deity, were represented by the black bull Nevis of Heliopolis. Nut and Neith were both depicted as the great celestial cow who gave birth to the cosmos and other deities. Mehet-Wart, another goddess associated with creation, was depicted as a cow. The mother goddesses Hathor and Nekhbet were both pictured with the form of a cow. Hesat, the goddess of birth, was depicted as a cow, and the foster mother of Horus, the cow goddess Sekhet-Hor, was even invoked to safeguard cattle, a prayer that now availed nothing in the face of the true God's power. It should also be noted here that the Egyptians did possess some sheep, Exodus 9:3, though apparently not for food or sacrifice. Compare Exodus 8:26, and Ram gods figure prominently in the Egyptian pantheon, Ba-Banabejedet, the primeval Harishaf, and the Nile god Khnum. Even the supreme god Amun was symbolized by a ram with curved horns. The statement that all the livestock of Egypt died, Exodus 9:6, must actually mean that the vast majority of their animals died, as livestock are still alive in Exodus 9:19-21, and horses in Exodus 14:7-9. Even so, we can imagine that this was a major blow to the economy and military strength of Egypt. Once again, God spares the Israelites, as Pharaoh discovers. But still he refuses to let God's people go. Boils once again the false deities of Egypt are of no help, including Sekhmet, a guardian goddess against disease besides her major role as war goddess Imhotep, the god of medicine, and Isis, goddess of life and healing. Pharaoh's magicians are now too afflicted to be present, yet Pharaoh's heart is still hardened. Interestingly, the narrative for the first time states that God actually hardened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 9:12, an intent God had earlier stated, Exodus 4:21, Exodus 7:3. Yet before this, Pharaoh is seen as hardening his own heart, Exodus 8:15, Exodus 8:32. God then is now reinforcing Pharaoh's stubborn inclination for the purpose described in verse 16, see Romans 9:14. To better understand this, please refer to the article Twist of Fate at Hail. This plague killed servants, animals, and cattle if they were not under shelter. Plants and trees were also destroyed, including crops in the field. That this was an extremely severe thunderstorm of icy hail, and that the fire darting to the ground was lightning is apparent from Psalm 78. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He also gave up their cattle to the hail and their flocks to fiery lightning. Psalm 78:40. These destructive elements, of course, had a devastating impact on the nation's food supply. And still the gods of Egypt were shown to be powerless. The sky goddesses Nut and Hathor, the sky god Horus, Shu, the god of air and bearer of heaven, Seth, the god of storms and protector of crops, Neper, the god of grain crops, Osiris, the ruler of life and vegetation, Isis, the goddess of life, and all the cow and ram deities mentioned above proved impotent before the true God. Pharaoh now relents for the time being. Of course, once the plague subsides, he again changes his mind. Locusts. By this point, Pharaoh's servants are attempting to impress on him that Egypt is destroyed. Exodus 10:7. So he resorts to bargaining with Moses once again. But as he will not accede to God's demands, a mighty wind brings an infestation of locusts on the land. The results are horrible to behold. Whatever vegetation had been left after the hail is now devoured by the locusts. The land is stripped bare. It must have been a wonder to look out over what was once a fertile, bountiful land, and to no longer see the color green among the plants. Verse 15. Again, Seth, Neper, Osiris, and Isis are all defied, as are Shu, god of the air, and Amun, god of the wind. This terrible plague must have left the nation on the brink of starvation. In desperation, Pharaoh even confesses sin and asks forgiveness outwardly, but his contrition is short-lived. By now Moses may have become accustomed enough to Pharaoh's stubbornness so as to not be surprised when, once again, Pharaoh changes his mind about releasing the Israelites.